10 million people, forcing them to relocate within Ukraine or abroad. As the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine grows, our next guest understands the challenges of getting aid to the most vulnerable more than most. Joining us now is Ross O'Sullivan. He's the head of the emergency operations for Concern Worldwide. Ross, great to have you on the show with us. We're talking about a quarter of the population on the move, just to give people a sense of the scale of the response that's required. And I know when you looked at the situation and the surrounding nations, you decided actually the people in Ukraine need your support most of all.
Good morning, Julia, and it's really nice to be with you today. Yeah, absolutely. We have been down in the region now for over 5 weeks. And did take a very hard look at the neighbouring countries, the countries bordering Ukraine, in terms of the outpouring of people from Ukraine, and felt very quickly that in terms of who was arriving out of Ukraine at that time, the first wave of people leaving, that the countries were coping reasonably well in terms of receiving them and supporting them, and also the profile of these people that were leaving at that time were largely not staying in the neighbouring countries, but continuing on to third countries. So it was felt that really the 4.1 million people have now left Ukraine, but there's an estimated 7 million people inside Ukraine on the move, and a further upwards of 12 million people who are stranded in affected areas, who will likely move if and when they can, like Mariupol that you just described.
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing numbers in the space of, just 5 weeks. Talk to me about how you're providing support.
Thank you. Well, along with our European alliance partners, I mean, so no agency can do this alone. This is huge by any stage. But along with our alliance partners from Germany and Italy and the Czech Republic and France, we're assisting people in a number of regions inside central and western Ukraine, supporting them with a combination of food and non-food packages, typical family hygiene items, as well as items for babies. Support is also being provided to informal accommodation centres where these people are staying. There are literally hundreds of these scattered throughout central and western Ukraine. And we're supporting them with laundry facilities, with showers, with toilets, with bedding, and some very specific items of clothing that are not currently found locally, like underwear and socks. To give you a kind of idea, I visited a secondary school in a rural village of less than 100 people normally living in that area, and in that secondary school, bedded down in the basketball arena, in the basketball area. Were 70 people that were displaced, and they were, using the facilities of one toilet and one shower. And these are areas where we can support the local authorities and the local health self-help groups with, in terms of improving the lot for these people.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many challenges. I know you're also targeting people for cash payments too, just so that they have that extra level of security if they are moving around and can pay for things themselves. How do you keep your people safe? Because I just deliberately mentioned the story of what the Red Cross is saying, and they simply can't get people out of Mariupol. And these are specifically sort of devastated areas. But to your point, there's a danger of confusion between military and humanitarian supplies, and trying to ensure your people are safe and actually able to get to people where they're needed.
Well, I mean, currently in most of Western Ukraine, access is still relatively open. We are able to access that part of the country from a number of the neighbouring countries, including Poland and Romania. We manage risk in Ukraine the same way as we would manage risk the world over. And that is by looking at what is happening and making sure that our staff are kept well informed, and that we are, very aware of what is going on around us. I mean, at the end of the day, as humanitarian aid workers, we have to work on the basis that we are not a threat to anybody, and therefore should not be seen as a threat by anybody.
Yes, we hope. Ross, you mentioned something that I think is very important too. You described the profile of those that have left Ukraine so far, and it seems like they've got other places to go on to. Perhaps they had an element of resources available to allow them to move. They had people, family, friends, whatever, in different countries that perhaps they could go to. You said something recently to the Irish Defence Committee, and that also caught my attention, and that was that for the next wave of refugees, it's a case of simply having to leave no matter what their situation and what they go on to. In many ways, their situation is worse.
Their situation is very, very different indeed. I mean, without doubt, the vast majority of people that have been able to leave Ukraine so far were able to leave Ukraine. They had some resources and in many cases had family or friends or somewhere to go. Inside Ukraine right now, people are moving from east through the central regions into the west. They are moving as far as they feel they have to go to find safety, security, protection. And they don't want to leave the country. They're not planning to leave the country. And these families are now, the profile of them, they're intergenerational families. They have very young children. They have elders with them who have very, very, very specific needs. And these people will not leave the country unless they absolutely have to.
Yeah, it emphasises the point about the time needed to stop this somehow before those people are forced to leave too. As you mentioned, there are multiple NGOs, bodies, donations working and trying to provide support here. Ross, what's the danger that that system that's been set up so far becomes overwhelmed by sheer scale, numbers over such a short period of time, and how can that be best prevented?
I think there's two things here, Julia. I mean, one is what is required now and through the coming months in Ukraine. I mean, the needs are absolutely astronomical. You're talking about, as I say, I'm Irish, and I've been recently referring to the numbers of people on the move inside and outside Ukraine are twice the population of my own country. I mean, it's just staggering what we're talking about. And even if things were to improve tomorrow, and what I mean by that is if there was a cessation in hostilities, if there was a ceasefire, if the conflict suddenly stopped, it would be months, if not years, before these people can return to their former lives. And so there is a huge amount of support they need, both now and through the coming weeks and months. And all I can say is that the generosity of the people in the United States and around the world has shown incredible kinship and and support for the Ukrainian people. And this has to continue. Yet, having said that, there are crises all around the world that don't just disappear when Ukraine has suddenly happened. Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, to name just two. You know, there is hunger, there is famine, there is crisis, there is war, there is conflict. And one of the big worries we have is that, the focus on Ukraine, albeit important, necessary, and fully validated, must not come at the expense of what is going on in the rest of the world.
It's such an important point. It must be focused upon, but we can't forget or allow other big issues to be overshadowed too. Thank you for the reminder. And Ross, thank you for the work you and your team are doing. Stay safe, please. Ross O'Sullivan, Head of Emergency Operations for Concern.